Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Janet Ross. I'm one of the Dynamo Advisory Board members. Welcome to the panel session today on inclusive recruitment in tech. On our panel with us today, we have Lyndsey Britton-Lee and Lyndsey Harbottle from 50/50 Future. We have Mark Harbottle from Edward Reed Recruitment, and we have Maxine Henry from People Place HR. So we often talk about importance of diversity in the workplace and how it brings a different set of opinions and perspectives to your organisation. In addressing diversity and inclusion, a lot of organisations see in the tech sector see recruitment as one of the biggest challenges and pain points. So throughout this workshop, we'll explore a holistic approach to attracting and retaining a more diverse workforce and how it's complementary to an inclusive recruitment process. We'll look at the whole 360 recruitment cycle from job adverts through to interview panels and beyond. We'll highlight the impact that bad habits and bias can have on the hiring process. We'll listen firsthand to the panel and as they share some real life examples and experience from their own experiences. And finally, we'll hopefully you'll gain some useful tips and best practice and be equipped with relevant strategies that you can implement it within your organisations immediately. So throughout the session, you will have the opportunity to ask any questions of our panel. And at that point, I'm going to hand you over to Lyndsey.
Thank you very much. That's Lyndsey over here, not the other one for now. Thanks, Janet. Thanks for that intro. It was great. And hi to everybody. I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. I know we have been and always do. It's always a great day. So before we get on to hearing from our stellar lineup this afternoon, I thought it might be a good idea just to set the scene a little bit so that you can see an overview of diversity and inclusion in the tech sector with a few stats. So only 18% of UK IT professionals were born overseas, and only 17% female, 8% disabled, and 21% over 50. The average salary difference for men and women in tech is a whopping 25%. IT specialists from minority groups are more likely to be in non-permanent employment, and a massive 83% of tech execs are white. Shocker. IT specialists from minority groups are generally more likely than others to be self-employed, and particularly for older workers in these positions. 2/3 of tech leavers indicate that they would have stayed if their employer fixed its work culture. So I'm sure, like, generally this doesn't come as much of a shock to us because we know that it's not particularly diverse, and that's one of the reasons why we are here today in this session. I do think it's important to give you an overview like that so that we can see the stats in that way, because it does present a bit of a harsh reality and one that we all have to take responsibility for. So in tune with that, we know that our society is changing. We know that it is getting more diverse. We know we have more LGBT+. We know we have more people in the workforce with disability and more BAME people coming into the workforce. So with that being said, we know that therefore that then the recruitment landscape is going to be changing as well. So just to give you a bit of an overview of how this is changing and how it's going to be changing in future, a huge 75% of the global workforce will be made up by millennials by 2025. So that's not actually that long in the future. 85% of female millennials look for employers with a strong record in diversity, and 67% of candidates want to join a diverse team of different ethnicities and ages. So we know based on that, we have got to get our workplaces prepared to deal with all of this diversity, and we know that diversity in itself isn't the answer. It's also about inclusion, so making those people, once we hire them, feel included and part of something. Now, in terms of 50/50 in our approach, so we, our diversity and inclusion training consultancy, we have a specialism in gender, but with a lot of our content, we want that to transfer into all areas of D&I. We refer to it as D&I, diversity inclusion. And for us, that means that when we talk about 50-50, we're not talking about an approach where we're talking about half and half of a department or a workforce need to be male and female or the like. It's really about equal opportunities for everybody. It's about every individual having access to opportunities and for them to feel as though that they belong and can thrive in your workplace. So we know that we're going to have these millennials coming through at one side, and they already are, and we're going to get a lot more. They have a very different requirement to what our baby boomers that we are still holding on to have. And then we have all of this diversity coming through in between that we need to harness and embrace and value the difference of everyone within that. So it's crucial that we do start preparing for this now, which is all great, but how do we do that? And as Janet very nicely pointed out in the introduction, we know that when we speak to organisations in any sector, not just tech, of any size, recruitment is usually the pain point. When we ask what is your challenge in diversity and inclusion, recruitment. Although this isn't the only part of how to get a more diverse workforce, there's a lot more involved. It's such a huge topic. I'm not surprised that we point to it so much as a challenge because it's riddled with subjectivity and bias. So what we would like to do with you today is to go through the whole recruitment process end to end, and just we're going to barely be scratching the surface because it's such a big topic, but hopefully you'll get some real practical tips from experts in the field. So I want to start off with job ads, and Lynsey, if I can get you to just kick off with this one. In terms of job ads, what can we do to make our ads more inclusive?
Cool. So Lynsey, as you mentioned, it's such a massive area to cover, so we'll give you a whistle-stop tour of what we think and best practice. For me, thinking methodically, I would start at the top. So looking at your job titles, be very conscious of labeling job titles, things like guru, like ninja, superstars, because again, our bias comes into play, or even how we associate with those words. And if we don't reflect with them and if they don't sit with us, then you might be putting particular people off from applying for those roles. Again, consider things like salary brackets. A lot of organisations don't include salary brackets on their job ads when they're posted. People have a threshold when they're applying for positions and they have financial commitments that they need to make. By posting even a bracket or the salary if you can, it allows them to understand straight off the bat if it's something that's feasible for them or not, and it saves time from both sides. So it saves you having to go back to them, and it also saves time negotiating salaries later down the line if it's black and white. They would be my two crucial things off the bat: look at your salaries and look at your job titles.
Mark, from a recruitment perspective, is there anything that you've noticed either in terms of particularly bad practice that you've seen for us not to do, or any good practice that you want to add on to what Lynsey said?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess partly on the point that Lynsey made around using the right text, I remember seeing an advert, not of a local business, by the way, so I'm not snitching on anyone, but an advert for a technical role. And the advert talked about, come and join our business. We've got great banter. We have free donuts and beers on a Friday. I had to call the business and sort of tell them that you can't really talk like that. It doesn't attract the right breadth of people, the right variety of people. So certainly be careful on the text or the words or the language that you use. We would often advertise the same job in a variety of different ways. So a slightly different job title, for example, developer, business analyst, data analyst, those sorts of things, with a slightly different description. For example, one might have a few more bullet points, one might be more statistics based, one might be more creatively written, again, to attract a wider audience. It's quite easy to assess when you do that. We always see a higher yield of results and a broader yield of people as well applying to those sorts of roles. But it's easy to monitor and see what the success rate is.
Great, thank you. Maxine, from a perspective, is there anything that you would like to add into that?
Yeah, it's important to use, just echo what Mark says about using the correct language and making the job adverts appeal to all of the different groups that you want to appeal to and the recruitment pools. So just don't think about a bullet, just a list using, just like masculine language. Think about the language that you're using and gender neutral language if you can, because it'll appeal to a wider range and a broader range of people. So, yeah.
I think you made a really good point with that gender neutral language, Maxine. And it's one thing that maybe not a lot of people have heard of or are aware of that exists out there, but there's loads of really good gender decoders online. Most job boards, Total Jobs or Indeed, they all have free versions where you can literally copy or paste your copy into it, and it'll highlight masculine words, feminine words, and it'll give you those neutral alternatives. And that plays a really key part, because male coded words that we read, we automatically start in our head thinking of those stereotypes, whether consciously or unconsciously, and we'll have our own associations that we relate to them. And again, it's just being conscious of that, being conscious of your language and copy. You're going to be more inclusive in terms of who you're attracting for those roles. Mark, it was interesting what you said. So just to pick you up on the writing of different job specs in different ways. So one thing that we find when we're working with clients is that often they'll have a really long list of essential criteria. Would you have anything off the back of that you would say will try to set them out?
Yeah, so it's important before you start advertising or even start recruiting for a position on day one that you know exactly what your essential skills are and what your beneficial skills are. So we would not hire someone without X years experience or Y qualifications. I think before you advertise a role, you need to ask yourself whether that is essential or not, because you can find yourself given barriers to entry for certain groups of people. So as long as you're able to question yourself on, well, why is that important? Can we do without it? Could we look at something else? Would we cross-train? Would we, offer the same opportunity for a broader range of people with slightly different access to this role? And I guess it's about questioning yourself before you make the stab into the job market and things like that.
It's so important. I think in terms of when we're looking at the formatting of our job ads as well and what's essential and what's not, we know that there's a fundamental difference between the way women will look at job ads compared to men. Men, if they don't get 100% of the criteria, they will just apply for it regardless. More than happy to apply, but with women, they will try and get to that 100% before they even apply for the job. So if you've got a massive list, you're already creating a barrier for a lot of women. But then also in terms of looking at what skills they need, especially tech skills, you might actually be creating barriers for an older workforce where you could actually just train them up. Or if you're looking at years of experience, well, are you then creating barriers for graduates and the like as well? So really important to consider that beforehand. I want to just move us on a little bit now to the search for candidates. Now, with this one, this comes up a lot in terms of, especially with regional demographics. I think when people are trying to recruit a diverse workforce, depending on where you are in the world, that can be made much harder. Especially, we're in the Northeast, we're not a particularly diverse region to start off with. So it can be hard to know where to start to reach those candidates and to expand your networks to actually get in front of them and open those doors. So in terms of the search, what can we do to expand our networks? Lyndsey, have you got any thoughts on that to kick us off?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's really important that you understand who is currently applying for your jobs. So collect all of that data and information, because that'll give you a picture of who isn't, and then how you can put a strategy together to attract those people that are falling through the net for you. I think now we're in a really interesting position, and don't want to mention this word too much, but the way that we work is being turned up on its head. So now it's online, we're digital. which means your geographic reach could be so much more if remote working is an opportunity or an option for your business. So think outside of your own doorstep, so to speak. Look at your data and understand, as I said, who is applying, who isn't applying. Think outside the box. So in terms of your current recruitment strategies, where do you go? Is it typical job boards like Indeed, Reed, Hayes, whatever they might be? Looking at different social media platforms that maybe you haven't utilized before. And also, it should be complementary, in my opinion, that if you're looking to attract a particular demographic of individual that's not represented very well in your workplace currently, that should be complementary to your current recruitment method. So if you're looking for more females in your tech department, which is a common one for us, don't just go and target female-only networking groups. It needs to be a complementary strategy that really pulls in lots of different threads. But you can definitely look at your language, as we said in the job ads, in terms of those gender-coded words, and look at maybe where you can find those individuals, different LinkedIn groups, different tech meetups that we have even here in the region in the Northeast. But yeah, think outside the box, try new things, monitor it, track it, collect your data, review and revise and crack on. That's my brain dump of candidate searching.
I think it's really important to also bring up, and Mark, you've probably potentially had experience of this or know of other companies similar to yours who have, where in recruitment, you might get clients who come to you and say, we want to search specifically for female candidates, and kind of use you as a way of positive discrimination. I wondered if you had any experience about that and what, you know, what the outcome is.
Yeah, it is a challenge because, as you say, you know, so many more businesses ongoing are wanting that diversity. And for us, from a recruitment perspective, when a client does and has in the past asked us that question, I think it's been important for us to educate them properly on what the market looks like. If someone said to me, I want a shortlist that is an exact 50-50 split of, say, men and women, or, you know, XYZ religions and races and what have you, we can't guarantee it. The market doesn't reflect that. So for us, it of course is about educating, and what we say to people is you have to start from the beginning with that. You know, you have to be promoting it internally to ensure that people from other backgrounds, or you know, not your stereotype applicants, will look at your business and will be interested in applying. So when it comes to searching for candidates, things like referrals and recommendations is a really big one for a lot of businesses. Do you have any friends? Do you have any, you know, anyone in your network who might be interested in a job? That's all good and well, but just be very aware that what you don't want is the same group of people, you know, a group of lads who all went to university together and they've all been mates. You know, you create that, you know, certainly not the right culture. The other thing as well, and I guess just touching on that, encouraging a broader range of people applying, is we represent our clients, so we have to represent them in the best possible light. We know that applicants want to research companies, go on their websites, look at who they are, what they're about, you know, make sure every bit of activity from your business has the same theme, the same message, make it inclusive, make sure that if anyone was to fall on it, they would think that they would know rather that it is an inclusive business and would want to be part of that. So the whole image has to be important when it comes to searching for candidates.
Yeah, I think that's a massive thing, making sure that as an organisation, you're putting the right message out there across all of your platforms so that your first impressions for potential candidates makes them already feel included as part of that and feel that they do belong and they would thrive in your workplace. So I think it's a really great point to make. Maxine, in terms of organisations either using their first impressions as a way to attract more candidates, or what ways do you usually see organisations searching for candidates? I'm assuming, and this might be very wrong of me to assume, but once you've kind of got into a bit of a process of doing that, you don't often review it or audit it. You just kind of stick to what you know, don't you?
Yeah, totally. I was just going to say, Lyndsey, and to add to what Mark talked about is I really don't believe in positive discrimination when it comes to recruitment, because I just think it's a lazy way to recruit. You're taking the same process and just go, well, you know, this is fixed, so we don't need to change it, when really you want to be looking at breaking the whole process down and looking at why, if we change X, will Z change, and, you know, really sort of mixing it up a little bit. And I think it's also really important to understand your employee value proposition. So if you're looking to attract more women in tech, advertise childcare. I know this is really stereotypical, but advertise childcare, advertise flexible working, advertise duvet days, or, hey, by the way, if your kid's sick, you're not going to lose a day's sick, you're not going to lose a day's pay for whatever reason. Advertise all of that, get that out on social media, that this becomes the norm, so that people then go, actually, I'd really like to work at that organisation because they offer this wide range of benefits of working for them. But again, when you're displaying your value proposition to potential candidates, make sure that that's gender neutral too, and not just limiting childcare for women, because that's not right. There's a lot of men out there, my husband included, who does the majority of the childcare, the school runs, the pickups, the drop-offs, the I've hurt my knee, can daddy come pick me up from school. So it's just on that story and making sure that it's available on all different social media platforms, but the more traditional ways as well, because not everybody's on social media. So just making sure that that message is out there for people to come and sort of see it in real time, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think they're great points. So making sure that the way that you're communicating is on various platforms, so you do get access to a wide range of people out there. And also really good point about, you know, what can you offer to get that, make that work-life balance, so it's not so much of a challenge for one person in the household. And I think through these changes, as most of us have gone through recently with coronavirus, dare we say it again, but it is actually changing the way a lot of us have had to work. We are having to adapt more. So in future, it would be lovely to see that there is more flexible work and on offer for people, because the excuse for those restrictions are now not there. And it means that men can take a lot of that, which would be lovely to see. And hopefully that will allow more women to progress. And there's a lot less stigma attached. And we've got more positive male role models doing that in organisations. So it really can make a lot of impact in a lot of ways by just doing that. I think it would be good actually at this point, Lyns, we spoke a bit about positive discrimination, and I think that can be quite confusing for a lot of people, because if you want to get a diverse workforce, then what's wrong with going out and getting specific people to tick those boxes? Do you want to just give our stance on where we are with that one?
Yes, this is a favourite of mine. So I totally agree with the rest of my fellow panellists. We personally at 50/50, as individuals, Lyndsey and I, as co-founders of the company, but also from a corporate stance too, positive discrimination is not for us. Now, the reason behind that is that it should be the right candidate for the job. And if you are simply ticking a box to get that number, that target or benchmark that you've decided, you're going to fall short in other areas. So you're not going to have the culture internally to support that individual to be the best that they can be. There's going to be stigma around why certain people are getting certain positions over others. And it's going to create a bit of toxic festering, I would imagine, internally. For us, we're big advocates of positive selection. So what we mean by that is when we've gone through the whole recruitment process, at the very end, when you have two candidates based on equal merit, if one of those candidates is from an underrepresented group, then 100% we would definitely recommend that you take the individual from the underrepresented group if they're on par with each other, not if they're not. They should get the job because they're worthy of the job and they're able to do it. So yes, definitely one for positive selection, not for positive discrimination for us.
And you cannot state anywhere that you are a meritocratic organisation if you have no diversity in your senior leadership teams or across the organisation. that in itself is massively contradictory. So please do not say that you are if that is not the case. So moving on now. So if we now look at the selection process. Now, this is the part of the process where bias can really start to creep in, and we do start to make assumptions. How do we feel about things like CVs? Should they be anonymized? How do we do that effectively in terms of automated processes? Can they be helpful or harmful? There's lots of different tools out there that project that they can help in these areas. What do we think can help us with this selection process in terms of D&I? Lyndsey, have you got any initial thoughts?
So firstly, I think using data and tech can be really useful because it does reduce that subjectivity, and it tries to eliminate some of our unconscious bias that's going to affect our decision-making processes during the selection process. But be wary and use tech with caution, because they're not themselves free of flaws. A really good example is Amazon a few years ago tried to make this recruitment AI tool, and they fed it 10 years worth of data, and it spun out their top 10 CVs out of 100. But the issue was the data that it had been fed was based on historical information, obviously, and we all know that men dominate the tech world, particularly in those really technical roles. So the AI was really clever and started to discard women. It started to discard CVs that had any mention of female-only universities or women's chess as maybe extracurricular information. So definitely be wary of AI. I do think there are some fab tools like the language decoders that can be used. Just be conscious that it's bias in, bias out. So AI tools can pose more of a problem. For me, it's about being as regimented as possible. So things like scoring matrices and having a system of how you're going to rate candidates is really useful, because it gets you to second guess what you're doing. So you can see on paper exactly each individual and their score. And that helps you with that selection process to whittle down your candidates fairly and not let your judgments get in the way of things.
Great. Maxine, from your perspective, I'm sure the selection process is one you're very familiar with. Is there any kind of either bad practice or top tips that you can give in terms of what we should be doing to make it more inclusive?
Yeah, I think the day of the CV is gone, if I'm totally honest, because you can write anything you like on it, and then you meet the person in the flesh or virtually, and they're nothing like what they've come across. And I was thinking about this, and I don't know what the exact replacement is yet. It's something that I'm still working on. But I agree with what Lynn said about a selection matrix or a skills matrix. And I think if I was a hiring manager, I think a top tip I would be interested to do is look at the job role itself. What are the key things that I want to do? And ask somebody to fill in sort of an application form give examples of how they've displayed those characteristics, and then judge the person on their ability to fill that in. Not necessarily fill that in, but judge a person on their answers, and then invite them to interview based on what they've submitted. It's too easy now to go through a read and click, apply for 20 different jobs in 10 seconds almost. So if you make the process not more difficult, but more engaging, then you'll get a different type of person that wants to apply for the role. So yeah, I think that's my work in progress, I think, for me.
Yeah, I totally agree, Maxine. I think like what you've said is bob on, because we really need to be looking at people's skills and experience and the relevancy for the role rather than them as a person. That's not why we're recruiting them. We're recruiting them to do a job. And are they going to be the best fit for that job? And in terms of there's no silver bullet at the minute in terms of what can we do to replace CVs or what's best. I think it really is a bit of trial and error in what works for you and your company, and whether that's having AI to assist that process or anonymising CVs. Lyndsey, I know you're desperate to jump in from.
I was just going to say, so talking about like anonymising CVs, I think that definitely helps with unconscious bias. And unconscious bias for us is a real big factor when it comes to the recruitment process. We'll not talk about the whole other D&I holistic strand because it plays in everything that we do. But it's great to remove things like names or dates of university so you can work out ages. And there's loads of research on how different names from possibly different countries, different backgrounds, we're automatically building those assumptions. So yes, on anonymising CVs might have its help, but the problem for me lies when it gets to interview, because as soon as that person walks through the door, again, our unconscious bias kicks in, and we're going to start making those judgments straight away about individuals without really giving them the chance to win us over or to do their best. So my advice in terms of selection process, anybody involved in your hiring team should be going through unconscious bias training to be aware of their biases, to understand how they're going to influence those decisions that they're making, but also learn strategies to break that so you can try and remove that as much as you can from the process that you're going through. Mark, I'm sure you've had clients or individuals that want you to replace X person rather than fill the job.
Yeah, there is a lot of that, and you know, we need. It's about going into a recruitment process looking to hire the best person for the role, not to, well, get a bargain sometimes or replace John who left. You know, and I do struggle often with, when it comes to feedback on interviews, for example, oh, well, John used to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and this guy can't do that, or this person can't do that, rather. It is tough. I agree with you on Lyndsey on the bias point. So anonymized CVs, at what point does the bias eventually kick in? I recruited for a CTO role last year, and the business gave me the entire responsibility to put people forward to first stage interviews. So they said the first round is going to be on X date at Y times, just book people in for me. And I, you know, did the entire application. I met everyone who, you know, etc. So there was no expectation that the shortlist of, say, 6 people would be 50% this, you know, 20% that, or whatever. I was able to say these are the best 6 people for the role in the area, you know, who meet the criteria. These are them. Obviously, it's my responsibility there to ensure that I am, you know, inclusive and equal in my selection process, of course. But that's kind of what the business were paying me for. In the end, we had 1 male and 1 female at final stage interviews, so it was absolutely brilliant. You know, it worked really, really well. I think businesses need to be absolutely clear on what their process is going to be, from application through to offer, to make it fair, to make it standardised, and make it equal as well.
Absolutely. I've just got a comment in the chat box with Emma who says her organisation uses, it's just popped up there. Her organisation uses a competency-based application form and a panel to shortlist an interview, and that's really helped them. So I think that's a really great one to use as a model. I think that can really help. I know we've touched on this a little bit already, but just to like loop it back into the next section, because I'm getting conscious of time now. But in terms of interviews, so we've already been really inclusive in our methods so far, and we've, you know, used blind CVs, we've used objective methods to get to this point. We then get to interviews, and who knows what the future of interviews is going to look like, whether there might be more virtual ones, but let's assume we're going to now go into face-to-face interviews. As humans, we are going to make assumptions, we're going to make judgments. What can we do to make sure that all of the good work that we've done up until this point isn't undone? So is there anything that we can do in the interview process to make it more inclusive, Lyndsey?
I think be consistent. So the same environment ideally for every candidate to make it as equal and fair as possible. I think communicate with your candidates coming in for interview of what to expect. I also think that's really important to check with them whether they have any requirements or accessibility needs to make them feel at ease that they can come in straight away. And one thing, so another life of ours, Lyndsey and I, was Campus North, which was very informal, relaxed, lots of beanbags, lots of tech startups, and people were jeans and jumpers. And individuals coming into Campus North that were maybe suited and booted, I'm sure sometimes they felt uneasy because it wasn't the norm for us. And when I've been working with clients as well, going through their recruitment process, they'll often forget to tell their candidates that it might be a jeans and jumpers workplace. So just try and think of every single detail of how that person's going to feel welcome when they come in. And then for me, again, it comes down to being regimented in your approach. So know your questions, know what you're asking, know how you're scoring it to try and reduce that bias. I see that, Phil, you've made a really good point in the chat as well about the criteria you set as bias anyway. Bias is going to creep in inevitably somewhere. It's really hard to eliminate from the whole thing because of ourselves as human beings. But I think doing everything in your power to try and be more inclusive and try and get it under control is all we can really ask of people, to try and make that impact and make a bit of a difference.
We touched on unconscious bias training before. Mark, do any of your clients ask whether you've had unconscious bias training if you're doing work for them?
Yeah, they do. Not as often as I expected, if I'm really honest with you. You know, we as a business work very hard to go through the unconscious bias. You talked a bit about the regional, you know, the emphasis on the regional perspective. With us being a Newcastle business, that's really important for us to be able to do that. I certainly, Lynsey, would reflect what you said around the importance of communication. There was a story going around that Richard Branson back in his day wanted to set up a recruitment business, and the reason he didn't was he said for every 10 people we have going forward for a role, 9 are going to have a negative experience. So that, you know, the Virgin brand is all about experience. I kind of disagree with that. I think if you're communicating with everyone, if everyone knows what to expect, if everyone is fully briefed ahead of time, and if they're unsuccessful, you explain the reasons why, that is a good, ultimately, a positive experience for them. It's something that I will always do. And the knock-on effect is people will still have a positive impression of your business. They could reapply for roles in the future. They could mention something positive in the region or in the area about you as well. So I think, you know, again, regimentation and communication, massive.
Absolutely. So Maxine, interviews, and people are actually carrying out the interviews, what would you recommend for people?
I always try to build a panel of at least 2 genders, 2 different genders as a minimum, because that way you've got cross biases by nature. Like Lynn said earlier, you're not going to eliminate the biases that naturally come out, but just be mindful of them, and just make sure that you have allowances to sort of mitigate anything that, you know, could sort of allow one to overtake another, I suppose. And play devil's advocate as well. Like, you know, when you sum it up at the end and you decide on which candidate's going to get the role, play devil's advocate with each other and, you know, really push to say, well, why do you think that? What is your understanding of that person? So
definitely, I think it's really important to set out at the beginning, like sow the seed at the beginning as well, to say, let's use conscious inclusion as part of this process, and let's try and be as inclusive and diverse as possible. And we're going through, and let's challenge each other and pick each other up as we go through if we're not making those inclusive decisions. But having diversity within the panel surely opens up more doors for those that you're allowing to come in. I'm just going to go on to the next one because I realise we're getting a bit short on time. But obviously, once we've even hired someone, the process isn't going to stop there. So in terms of onboarding and culture, how do we make sure that if we're recruiting all of this diverse talent, and how do we make sure that it's still inclusive for them once they get through the door? We know that quite a large number, 36% of new hires quit after being hired because it wasn't what they were expecting. So how can we ensure that that doesn't happen? So Lynn, if you want to kick us off again, please.
Yeah, I think again it's about managing those expectations and bringing it down to the things that, again, you might overlook. So what do you expect? What do people do for lunch? What do people wear? Just make them feel as prepared as possible for that first day when they walk in the office, and also take the time out to check in with them and see how they're doing. And a big one for me, so in terms of the culture, all of this inclusive recruitment is brilliant, but if you don't have an authentic connection with diversity and inclusion as a business, and you're doing it as a lip service, you're not going to have the culture to support people coming in. So make sure it's authentic, make sure that everybody is involved and behind it, and that will really help in terms of making people feel at ease and making them feel like they can be their true selves in the workplace.
Absolutely. And Mark, have you got anything to add on to onboarding and that side of things?
Yeah, I guess from both a recruitment and a personal perspective as well. So the best onboarding I ever had with a business was when I was put into a 5-minute meeting with every key manager across the business, even though they weren't my department, they weren't someone I'd be interacting with on a daily basis, just to get not only a clear picture of the business and how it operates, but also to get a feel for the culture as well. You do, very, very easily. I appreciate that might not be the easiest with a huge organisation who are hiring, in 10s, 20s, 100s, for example. But I think giving someone exposure to a broader variety of people in the business who weren't the guys part of the recruitment process will help someone in bed. It'll help someone say hello on the way to the lunch break and things like that. So following up regularly as well, Lyndsey, following on your point, follow up regularly, monitor, track, improve, and look for the negatives, look for the concerns. Don't assume it'll be okay. Ask the hard questions.
Brilliant. And Maxine, anything else to add on to that point?
Yeah, totally. I once worked with a team member who identified as binary, and they were really great at helping create a culture which was open to asking difficult questions, because this is the first time I had to work with somebody that identified as binary, and I didn't know really what to do. And this person was really great at kind of opening the doors and allowing those really difficult questions. And just being honest about what you don't know, and what you do know, and allowing that space for change. So that would be what I would suggest.
Fab, thank you. We're just going to get on to final points in a minute to wrap up. I just want to loop in what Amy has said in the comments here. So in terms of unconscious bias, this kicks in when we're particularly stressed or pushed for time. So slowing down and just even giving an extra second of thought about your decisions is a really great way to allow you to make better decisions, especially at interviews. So thanks for bringing that up, Amy. And she's also pointed out that Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, is a definite recommendation in terms of how we think in around unconscious bias. So thanks for that, Amy. So for final thoughts, we've covered quite a lot today. And like we say, we're barely scratching the surface. But if there was one thing that we wanted our audience today to take away from an inclusive recruitment process, what would it be? Lynn, come to you.
For me, it needs to be holistic. So it's not just about fixing recruitment. Yes, it's a key area. It's often the scapegoat used for diversity and inclusion, but you need everything else to support that and back it up. So your website, your imagery, your tone of voice, your leadership internally. There's so many other factors that come into play to really make it truly inclusive. So brilliant start with recruitment, but also think about everything else that feeds into that. And impartial perspectives, Phil touched on that earlier in the chat, are a really good way of giving you a sounding board to make sure that you're not in your own little corporate bubble.
Brilliant. And Mark, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, so we've talked a couple of times in this session about having a plan, sticking to it, following it up, having consistency, and absolutely essential, of course. I guess what I'd say is be prepared to review it, analyze it, and adapt where necessary. Are we getting the results that we want out of this? Are we prepared to go back to square one? That interaction, communication, and sharing of knowledge, whether it be through tech, whether it be through external party, whatever. For me, it's about being ready to adapt.
Yeah, brilliant. And that a lot of companies, it's that old thing of if you keep doing what you've always done but expecting a different result, it just doesn't work, does it? So reviewing and adapting your processes is perfect. And finally, Maxine?
I think my top tip would be take personal ownership for your learning and build an awareness. We could do that on your behalf. So just kind of make sure that you're always asking yourself, why, what if I change, what will happen? So taking personal ownership for development is my top tip.
Wonderful. I think that sums it up really nicely. I think we all have a personal responsibility to take ownership of this and be more inclusive. It isn't just HR, it's not just your hiring managers, it's not just senior leadership. This is about how we make our organisations as a whole more inclusive. It has to be embedded in the culture. We are all part of that and have to be change agents. So I think that's a brilliant point to end on. Thank you to absolutely everybody for joining us. Thank you to our lovely panelists with their wonderful insights. If anybody does want to have either further training on this, we do run 50/50 run open sessions on inclusive recruitment and unconscious bias. We have a trilogy of 1-hour webinars that run weekly every month. So the next one starts on 7th of July with demystifying diversity. The week after we do unconscious bias, week after inclusive recruitment, where it's a bit more in depth. But you can see our contact details for everybody on the screen now. So if you do have any questions, please do feel free to contact us anytime. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.